A German Shepherd puppy claimed an old man's couch, and when he learned why, he cried. At first, it seemed like just a stubborn dog who wouldn't move. But the truth behind why this puppy refused to leave that couch will shake his entire world. Because what looks like a simple fight over a piece of furniture is actually a battle for something far greater: his home, his health, even his life. As the pressure mounts, threats close in, and the old man finds himself facing danger he never expected, the mystery of the dog's loyalty begins to unravel. But the answer isn't what anyone thinks. What secret is this puppy guarding? And when the truth is finally revealed, will it save the old man or break him completely? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The morning sun hadn't yet warmed the frost-covered windows when Willis Brandt shuffled into his living room, coffee mug in hand, and stopped dead in his tracks. There, sprawled across his late wife Martha's beloved floral couch like it owned the place, was a young German Shepherd puppy. Willis blinked hard, wondering if his morning coffee hadn't kicked in yet. But no, the dog was real enough. Its ears perked forward and intelligent brown eyes fixed on him with unwavering attention. The pup's head tilted slightly, as if studying Willis just as intently as Willis was studying it. "Now how in the world did you get in here?" Willis muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Living alone meant he didn't talk much these days. The shepherd didn't move an inch, just kept watching him. Its tail gave a single thump against Martha's favorite throw pillow, the one with the embroidered roses she'd worked on during her chemotherapy sessions. Willis felt his chest tighten at the sight. "That's not your spot," he said firmly, setting his coffee down on the side table. "Come on now, off you go." He made shooing motions with his hands, but the dog merely cocked its head the other direction, clearly unimpressed by his authority. Willis stepped closer, reaching out to gently nudge the pup off the couch. Just then, a sharp scraping sound caught his attention. He turned to see a bright yellow envelope sliding under his front door, the Homeowners Association logo clearly visible even from across the room. His stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came in those envelopes, temporarily. Abandoning his standoff with the dog, Willis crossed to the door and snatched up the notice. His hands shook slightly as he tore it open, eyes scanning the official-looking text inside. With each line, his frown deepened. "Effective immediately. No pets allowed. Fines beginning today. First offense $100. He looked back at the shepherd, who was now sprawled even more comfortably across the couch cushions. "You've got to be kidding me." The timing couldn't have been worse. Willis had no idea where this dog had come from, but he couldn't just throw it out on the street. Martha would never have forgiven him for that. But he also couldn't afford HOA fines on his fixed income, not with property taxes coming due soon. Fresh wave of anxiety washed over him as he looked at the couch. It was one of the few things left that still felt like Martha. Her presence somehow lingered in the worn fabric and familiar floral pattern. Having this strange dog claiming it as territory made his chest feel tight. "Listen here," he told the shepherd, trying to sound stern. "This is temporary, understand? Just until we find wherever you belong." The dog's tail thumped again, as if agreeing to these terms. Willis went to the window and pulled the blinds closed, not wanting any nosy neighbors reporting him to the HOA. Then he grabbed a notepad from the kitchen drawer and carefully wrote out a found dog notice. He'd posted at Delia's diner across the street. Everyone in the neighborhood stopped in there at some point. The walk to Delia's was brief but cold, the morning frost crunching under his feet. The diner's windows glowed warmly, and the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around him as he pushed open the door. "Willis Brandt, as I live and breathe." Delia called from behind the counter, her gray hair escaping its bun as she worked. "Haven't seen you in here for weeks. Just need to post this notice," he said, holding up the paper. "Found a dog this morning. trying to track down the owner. Delia's eyes softened with interest. "A dog? You're keeping it?" "Just temporarily," Willis said quickly. "Until the owner claims it. Though with this new HOA rule," he shook his head. "Ah. You got that notice too?" Delia clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Seems mighty suspicious timing if you ask me. Here, let me put that up by the register where everyone will see it." Back home, Willis found the shepherd had not only reclaimed the couch, but had apparently rearranged the throw pillows to its liking. "Now that's enough of that," he muttered, moving to shoo the dog off again. The pup jumped down obligingly, only to hop right back up the moment Willis turned toward the kitchen. This pattern repeated itself several times over the next hour. Willis would get the dog off the couch, turn his back for just a moment, and find the shepherd right back in its chosen spot, looking entirely too pleased with itself. By mid-morning, Willis sat in his armchair, staring at the HOA notice on his coffee table while the dog stared back at him from its perch on Martha's couch. The morning sun had burned away the frost, but Willis felt chilled to his core. That couch was his last real connection to Martha, the place where they'd spent countless evenings together, where she'd rested during her treatments, where he'd held her hand in those final days. Now it had become contested ground between him and this mysterious four-legged invader who seemed absolutely convinced of its right to be there. The shepherd's steady gaze never wavered, as if it was carrying out some important mission by claiming that specific spot. Willis picked up the HOA notice again, reading through the harsh penalties one more time. He looked back at the dog, who met his gaze with those intelligent brown eyes. "You're going to get me in a whole heap of trouble," he said softly. The dog's tail thumped against Martha's pillow once more, and Willis couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, some way, this animal had chosen his home and that couch for a reason. Willis approached the German shepherd cautiously, his weathered hands reaching out to check for any sign of identification. The dog's amber eyes followed his movements, but remained perfectly still on Martha's floral couch. No collar, no tags. Nothing to indicate where this creature had come from or to whom it belonged. "All right, buddy," Willis muttered, reaching for the phone book. "Let's figure out where you belong." His fingers, marked with decades of machine work, traced down the yellow pages until he found the number for Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter. The call was brief and disappointing. No reports of missing German shepherds, matching the description. In the kitchen, Willis pulled out an old baby gate he'd kept in the garage. It had belonged to his daughter Tamsin's children, back when they still visited. He set it up across the kitchen doorway, creating a makeshift pen for the dog. "Come on now," he coaxed, trying to guide the shepherd into the kitchen with some leftover meatloaf. The dog followed willingly enough, but the moment Willis turned his back, there was a swift blur of movement. Somehow, the pup had already vaulted the gate and was back on the couch, sitting regally as if he'd never left. The bell above Delia Knox's diner door chimed as Willis pushed it open. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh-baked pie wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Delia looked up from behind the counter, her gray hair escaping its bun as she kneaded dough. "Willis Brandt, twice in one day? Must be my lucky morning," she teased, dusting flour from her hands. "Got a situation," Willis explained, describing the mysterious dog. "Think you could post a found dog notice by your register?" Delia's eyes sparkled with interest. "The one that keeps zipping back to your couch, like some kind of heat-seeking missile?" She chuckled. "Sounds like you've got yourself a zig there." "A what now?" "Zig. You know, the way he zigs and zags right back to that spot. Seems fitting, don't you think?" Willis hadn't planned on naming the dog, but somehow Zig stuck in his mind. He was still mulling it over when he returned home to find an official-looking envelope from the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association stuffed under his door. Inside was a notice, $50 per day for violation of the No Animals Ordinance, effective immediately. The sound of expensive leather shoes on his front porch came later that afternoon. Burke Halstead stood there in his tailored gray suit, heavy gold watch catching the sun as he extended his hand. Willis didn't take it. Mr. Brandt. Burke's smile was practiced perfect and completely empty. I trust you received our notice about the pet violation? Dog's not mine, Willis said firmly. Just keeping him safe until we find the owner. Burke's smile didn't waver. Rules are rules, Mr. Brandt. The HOA bylaws are quite clear. No animals permitted. The fines will continue to accrue until the situation is resolved. He paused, adjusting his silk tie. I'm sure the local shelter would be happy to take the animal off your hands. It would be the smart thing to do, wouldn't it? Something in Burke's tone made Willis's spine stiffen. He'd spent 43 years operating precision machinery, knowing that 1/1000th of an inch could mean the difference between success and failure. He recognized pressure when he felt it. I'll handle it my way, Willis replied, his voice quiet but firm. Burke's smile tightened. We all want what's best for the neighborhood, Mr. Brandt, but these fines can add up quickly. At your age, while living on a fixed income, we wouldn't want this to affect your ability to maintain your property payments. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Willis felt his hands curl into fists, remembering Martha's voice. Sometimes, standing your ground is the only way forward. I appreciate your concern, Willis said evenly. But the dog stays until we find its owner. That night, Willis watched as Zig paced between the couch and the front door with military precision. The dog's movements weren't random. They were purposeful, almost like a sentry on duty. Every few minutes, those alert amber eyes would fix on Willis, as if checking his position. At his desk, Willis pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind he'd used to record measurements and tolerances throughout his career. In his precise machinist's handwriting, he began a ledger: dates, fines, running totals. He circled payment deadlines, mind already calculating how to adjust his budget. The numbers were intimidating, but he'd faced worse challenges. Just before leaving, Burke had paused at the end of the walkway. I hope you understand, Mr. Brandt. If this persists, the HOA has certain obligations. Foreclosure is always a last resort, but sometimes necessary for the good of the community. The words were carefully chosen to strike at Willis's deepest fears: losing his home, his independence, everything he and Martha had built together. But as he watched Zig maintain his vigilant patrol between couch and door, Willis felt an inexplicable certainty that surrendering the dog would be a betrayal of something important, even if he couldn't quite explain why. The evening settled around them, Zig's panting the only sound in the quiet house. Willis studied his neat columns of numbers, remembering Martha's voice again. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same thing, love. He didn't know why he felt so protective of this mysterious dog, or why the thought of surrendering him to the shelter made his chest tight with something like panic. But 43 years of precision work had taught him to trust his instincts, even when he couldn't explain them. Zig paused in his patrol to rest his head briefly on Willis's knee, those amber eyes full of something that looked remarkably like understanding. Then he was back to his post, moving between couch and door with unwavering dedication, as if he knew something Willis didn't about why he needed to be there. The morning light filtered through Willis's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. He sat at his small breakfast table, studying the growing stack of HOA notices with a frown creasing his weathered face. The fines were adding up faster than he'd expected. $50 here, $75 there. Each envelope bore Burke Halstead's precise signature at the bottom, a calculated show of authority. Zig lay on the floral couch in the living room, his amber eyes fixed on Willis with that same unwavering attention he'd shown since arriving. Every few minutes, Willis would catch the dog's gaze tracking his movements, especially his breathing. It was starting to make him uneasy, though he couldn't say exactly why. The sharp rap at the front door made them both jump. Willis wasn't expecting anyone, and these days, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. He opened the door to find a bulky man in work boots and a contractor's vest, his shaved head gleaming in the morning sun. "Rafe Qualls," the man announced, flashing a laminated badge too quickly for Willis to read. "HO, a compliance inspection. Mr. Halstead sent me to check the property." Willis's stomach tightened. "I wasn't notified of any inspection." "Surprise inspections are within our rights," Rafe said, shouldering past Willis into the entryway. "Standard procedure when violations are reported." Willis could smell fresh sawdust and something metallic on the man's clothes as he passed. Zig immediately rose from the couch, his ears forward, watching Rafe's every move. "That the dog causing all the trouble?" Rafe asked, making a show of writing something on his clipboard. "Gonna need to document this violation." "He's not causing any trouble," Willis said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. He followed Rafe as the contractor moved through the house, opening closets and cabinet doors with aggressive efficiency. "Need to check the basement," Rafe announced, moving toward the steps. "Make sure there's no structural modifications." Willis felt his chest tighten with anger. This wasn't about home inspection. This was intimidation, plain and simple. But before he could protest, Rafe was already heading down the basement stairs, following him down. Willis's worn slippers caught on the edge of the top step. Time seemed to slow as he felt himself pitching forward, his arms windmilling uselessly. But suddenly, something solid pressed against his legs from behind, stopping his momentum. Zig had wedged himself beneath Willis, his strong body providing just enough support to prevent the fall. Heart hammering, Willis steadied himself against the wall. Before he could even catch his breath, Zig moved in front of him, positioning himself between Willis and Rafe. A low growl rumbled in the dog's throat, not aggressive, but clearly communicating a warning. Rafe's face darkened. "Better control that animal," he snapped, but he kept his distance. The inspection ended quickly after that. As soon as Rafe left, Willis called the HOA office to report the incident, his hands still shaking as he dialed. But by that afternoon, Burke had already sent a response dismissing the complaint. The letter was full of careful phrases about routine compliance checks and ensuring community standards. Willis sat at his kitchen table that evening, creating a new notebook entry. In his precise machinist's handwriting, he logged every detail. The unannounced visit, Rafe's aggressive behavior, the near fall on the stairs, Burke's dismissal. He'd started keeping track after the second fine notice, and now the pattern was becoming clear. Every interaction was carefully documented to look proper on paper, while the reality was pure intimidation. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Zig on the couch, that same couch he'd been trying to avoid looking at for months after Sarah passed. It had been her favorite spot to read, and after losing her, he couldn't bear to sit there. But now, watching Zig's alert presence, Willis realized the couch had become something different. It wasn't just a shrine to grief anymore. It was becoming a kind of checkpoint, a place where Zig kept watch over him with those knowing eyes. The next morning, Willis overheard Burke talking to Mrs. Peterson next door, his voice carrying clearly over the fence. "Property values are our primary concern," Burke was saying. "That's why we're strictly enforcing the no animals clause. Can't have the neighborhood going downhill. It affects everyone's investment." Willis's hands clenched around his coffee mug. He'd heard through Dahlia at the diner that 3 other elderly residents had already sold their homes after similar compliance issues. Burke's strategy was becoming clear. Use the rules to pressure older homeowners until they gave up and sold. Inside, Zig watched Willis from the couch, his gaze steady and unwavering. When Willis's breathing hitched with anger, the dog's ears pricked forward, and he tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Willis looked down at his notebook filled with dates and violations and careful notes. Then he looked at Zig, still watching him with that focused attention. Something clicked in his mind. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. This was about standing up to bullies who hid behind rules and regulations. This was about survival. He got up and made himself sit on the couch beside Zig, the first time he'd done so since Sarah died. The dog immediately pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Willis rested his hand on Zig's head, feeling the steady strength there. "Guess we're in this together now, boy," he said quietly. Zig's tail thumped once against the floral fabric, his eyes never leaving Willis's face. The morning sun streamed through the window, warming the couch that had once been too painful to approach. Now it felt like a fortress, a place where an old man and an unexpected guardian could face whatever came next. In his study, Burke Halstead was already drafting more notices, but Willis had stopped seeing them as official documents. They were weapons carefully disguised in procedural language. He added Burke's latest letter to his growing file of evidence, his machinist's precision. Now turned to documenting every move in this carefully orchestrated campaign of pressure. Every time Willis checked his mailbox now, Zig would leave his post on the couch to stand beside him, as if sharing the burden of each new notice. The dog's presence was becoming a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight, even as Burke's web of regulations tightened around them. That evening, Willis heard Burke talking to another neighbor, his voice carrying that same false concern. "We have to think about the future of Cedar Ridge. Sometimes that means enforcing rules that some residents might find inconvenient." Willis added this comment to his notebook. The pages now filled with a detailed record of every interaction, every violation, every veiled threat. The pattern was undeniable. Burke was using the HOA's authority to force out vulnerable residents, probably to flip their properties for a profit. On the couch, Zig maintained his vigilant watch, his attention never wavering from Willis's breathing, his movements, his well-being. The dog's protective instinct had already saved Willis once. Who knew what other dangers might be coming? But for now, they had their fortress, their checkpoint, their place to stand together against the pressure building outside their door. The morning after the near-fall incident, Willis stood in Delia's diner, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug while she closed up early. "We need to get that dog scanned," she said firmly, hanging up her flour-dusted apron. "My cousin works at the vet clinic on Oak Street. They'll check for a microchip, no appointment needed." Willis nodded, thinking of the growing stack of autodoses on his kitchen counter. "Suppose we should," he agreed quietly. "Been meaning to, just," he trailed off, not wanting to admit how attached he'd grown to Zig's steady presence. The drive to the veterinary clinic was short, with Zig sitting calmly in the backseat of Delia's station wagon. The German Shepherd's amber eyes met Willis's in the rearview mirror. Watchful as always, inside the clinic, a young technician greeted them warmly. "Let's see what this little scanner tells us," she said, running the handheld device over Zig's shoulders. The machine beeped, and she smiled. "Oh good, we've got something." Willis leaned forward as she typed the code into her computer. His heart nearly stopped when the information appeared on the screen. "Looks like he's registered to a service dog training program," the technician explained. "Sponsor listed as T-Brant." Willis's hand gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. Tamsin, his daughter's name hit him like a physical blow. Delia must have noticed his reaction because her warm hand settled on his shoulder. "Willis?" she asked softly. "You know this, T-Brant?" Before he could answer, the front door chimed. A man in an animal control uniform entered, holding a tablet. "I have orders regarding a dangerous dog," he announced, glancing at his screen. "German Shepherd, reported for aggressive behavior at 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive." Willis straightened up. "There's been a mistake," he said firmly. "Zig's not dangerous. He prevented me from falling down the stairs yesterday." The animal control officer looked uncomfortable but determined. "Sir, we have a formal complaint filed by Mr. Burke Halstead, president of your HOA," he reported, witnessing the dog growling and showing aggressive behavior toward a contractor performing authorized work. "That's not what happened," Willis protested, his voice rising. "He was protecting me." But the officer was already filling out paperwork. "I have to follow procedure, sir. The dog will need to be taken into custody, pending a dangerous dog hearing. Seizure is scheduled for," he consulted his tablet, "48 hours from now." Delia stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. That dog saved Willis from serious injury." The officer handed Willis a stack of papers. "You can appeal the decision, but the documentation shows a pattern of non-compliance with HOA regulations and a witnessed incident of aggression. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." The drive home was silent. Willis stared at the papers in his lap, his mind spinning. Tamsin. After 3 years of silence, she'd somehow put this dog in his path. But why? And why hadn't she come herself? Back at the house, Willis sank into his armchair beside Sarah's couch. Zig resumed his usual position, those intelligent eyes fixed on Willis with unwavering attention. The dog's head rested on the armrest, as if standing guard over something more than just furniture. Willis spread the papers across his coffee table. HOA violation notices, mounting fines, the animal control seizure order, and the printout from the microchip scan. 2 countdown clocks ticking away, one threatening his finances, the other promising to take away the very creature that had saved him from harm. His fingers traced Tamsin's name on the printout. The last time he'd seen her had been at Sarah's funeral, both of them too raw with grief to bridge the growing gap between them. She'd wanted him to see doctors, to accept help, to move closer to her in the city. He'd refused it all, clinging to his independence like a shield. Now here was Zig, somehow connected to his daughter, watching him from Sarah's couch with those knowing eyes. Each time Willis looked at the dog, he saw more questions than answers. Why had Tamsin chosen this particular dog? Why did Zig insist on staying on that specific piece of furniture? And why did it feel like the couch itself held secrets he couldn't quite grasp? As the evening light faded, Zig curled tighter against the armrest, his posture alert despite his relaxed position. Willis looked from the dog to the stack of papers, seeing both time limits closing in. Burke had managed to twist Zig's protective instinct into something dangerous, and now Willis had just 48 hours to figure out how to fight back. The morning dawned cold and gray, matching Willis's mood perfectly. He sat in his favorite armchair, watching the clock tick closer to 9 o'clock, the time animal control was scheduled to arrive. Zig lay on the floral couch as always, his amber eyes fixed on Willis with that same steady, knowing gaze that had unsettled him from day one. A sudden pounding at the door made Willis's heart jump. He wasn't ready for this, not yet. But before he could rise from his chair, the door burst open, and there stood Tamsin, his daughter, looking windswept and breathless, clutching a thick manila envelope to her chest. "Dad," she gasped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thank goodness I made it in time." Willis stared at her, frozen in place. It had been 3 years since he'd last seen her. 3 years of silence after that terrible fight, following his wife's funeral. Tamsin's dark auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her sharp features were softened by an urgency he couldn't quite read. "What are you doing here?" he managed to ask, his voice rougher than he intended. "Saving Zig," she said, moving to stand between the couch and where animal control would enter. "And you, if you'll let me." Willis's confusion must have shown on his face because Tamsin's expression gentled. "Dad, Zig isn't just any dog. He's a cardiac alert service dog. I placed him here, for you." The words hit Willis like a physical blow. "What?" "I supervise the prison training program for service dogs," Tamsin explained. pulling papers from her envelope with trembling hands. "When I heard about your heart problems from Delia." "Delia?" Willis interrupted, anger flaring. "She had no." "Right, she was worried about you," Tamsin cut in. "We all were. You wouldn't go to the doctor, wouldn't accept help, but I couldn't just—" She swallowed hard. "I couldn't just stand by and watch you fade away like Mom did." Zig hadn't moved from his spot on the couch, but his ears were pricked forward. Attention divided between father and daughter. Willis looked at the dog, really looked at him, and suddenly all those oddly focused stares made sense. "The couch," he said slowly. "He always goes back to the couch." Tamsin nodded, blinking rapidly. "We scent-trained him using your old cardigan and a swatch from the couch fabric. That's where your heart rhythm dips the most, when you sit there, remembering Mom." Willis felt his chest tighten, but this time he recognized it wasn't just emotion. Zig's head lifted, eyes intent on Willis's face. "See?" Tamsin said softly. "He knows. He's been watching over you this whole time, doing exactly what he was trained to do." Pride warred with understanding in Willis's heart. His daughter had been looking out for him all along, even when he'd pushed her away. The dog wasn't being stubborn or disobedient. He was being faithful to his training, to his purpose. Tears began to blur Willis's vision as the full weight of it hit him. All those nights Zig had watched him. All those times the dog had positioned himself just so. He wasn't just a stray. He was a guardian, placed there by a daughter who still loved him enough to find a way to protect him, even from afar. A knock at the door made them all jump. "Animal control," a voice called out. Tamsin sprang into action, spreading official-looking documents on the coffee table. "I have everything here," she said firmly. Medical documentation of Dad's condition, Zig's service dog certification, training records, and placement papers through the prison program. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, this qualifies as a reasonable accommodation that supersedes any HOA restrictions. The animal control officer, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed the paperwork carefully while Willis sat heavily on the edge of the couch. Zig immediately pressed against his side, and this time, Willis didn't try to move him. "These appear to be in order," the officer said finally. "I'll have to put the seizure order on hold pending AOO review of these documents." But she glanced between father and daughter, then at the dog. "I don't foresee any issues, given proper documentation has been provided." After the officer left, an awkward silence fell. Willis remained on the couch, one hand unconsciously buried in Zig's fur. Tamsin stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself as if holding something in. The floral pattern that had meant so much pain now seemed to bind them together, father, daughter, and the dog who bridged the gap between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Willis asked finally, his voice cracking. "Would you have accepted him if—" "I had," Tamsin countered gently. "Would you have admitted you needed help?" Willis looked down at Zig, then back at his daughter, seeing in her face echoes of her mother's determination, her mother's love. "No," he admitted, "I wouldn't have." After the revelations about Zig's true purpose, the small group gathered around Willis's kitchen table, determination replacing their earlier uncertainty. Tamsin spread out several official-looking documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she carefully drafted a formal reasonable accommodation request. "We need to be thorough," Tamsin explained, her pen moving steadily across the paper. "Every I dotted, every T crossed. Burke won't be able to dismiss this if we do it right." Willis nodded, focusing on his own task. His machinist's precision served him well as he created a detailed timeline of Burke's actions. He wrote in his neat, measured handwriting, March 15, no animal's clause suddenly introduced. March 16, first notice of violation. March 17, Burke's first visit suggesting immediate sale. Delia sat across from them, her usually cheerful face set in determined lines. "I'll help nail that snake," she said firmly. Let me meet with him. I'll say I'm worried about Willis and want to help him find a way out that works for everyone." Tamsin looked up sharply. "Are you sure? Burke can be intimidating." "Sugar, I've dealt with worse than Burke Halstead in my time," Delia said with a dry chuckle. She pulled out a small digital recorder from her purse. "Besides, I've got this little friend to help me along." Willis watched as Delia tested the recorder, speaking a few test sentences and playing them back. The quality was crystal clear. Every word would be perfectly captured. "Remember," Tamsin cautioned, "we need him to explicitly connect erasing the fines with Willis selling the house. That's the key." The next day, Delia walked into Burke's office, her usual friendly smile in place, but her heart pounding. The FOA president sat behind his massive desk, looking every bit the predator in his expensive suit and heavy gold watch. "Mrs. Knox," Burke said smoothly, "what brings you by today?" "Well," Delia began, letting worry color her voice, "it's about Willis Brandt. I'm concerned about him, with all these fines piling up. I was hoping we could find a graceful way for him to exit the situation." Burke leaned forward, his smile widening. "I'm so glad you've come to discuss this. Mr. Brandt's stubbornness is only hurting himself." The conversation continued, with Burke growing more comfortable and candid. Finally, he said the words they needed. "Look, if Willis agrees to sell quickly, at market rate, of course, I can make those fines disappear. Everyone wins." Delia kept her face neutral, though her heart leaped. They had him. Meanwhile, Willis attended preliminary HOA procedures, sitting through meetings where threats were wrapped in politeness and procedure. "We're simply concerned about maintaining community standards," they'd say, while making it clear they intended to force him out. Back at home, Tamsin prepared her father for the upcoming review meeting. "They'll try to trip you up," she warned. "They'll use formal language to confuse you. Just stay calm and stick to the facts." Willis sat on his old armchair, watching Zig maintain his steadfast position on the floral couch. The dog's presence seemed to help steady his breathing whenever anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. "We've got everything we need," Tamsin said, organizing their documentation. The medical necessity forms, the service dog certification, the timeline of Burke's actions, and now Delia's recording. No grandstanding, no shortcuts, just the truth. Delia joined them that evening, playing back the recording one final time to ensure it was safe. Burke's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "Make those fines disappear. If Willis agrees to sell quickly, that's our smoking gun," Tamsin said quietly. Willis looked at his daughter, feeling a surge of gratitude for her methodical approach to fighting back. She'd brought not just Zig into his life, but a way to stand up to Burke's intimidation with dignity and purpose. They organized their materials carefully, the reasonable accommodation request on top, followed by all supporting documentation. The timeline Willis had created showed the clear pattern of Burke's predatory behavior. Combined with Delia's recording, it told a compelling story of corruption hidden behind HOA rules. Zig watched them work, his alert eyes moving between the humans as they finalized their plans. When Willis's hand started shaking slightly while reviewing the documents, the dog immediately left his post on the couch and pressed against Willis's leg, providing steady comfort until his breathing evened out again. "Remember," Tamsin said, squeezing her father's shoulder, "we're not just fighting for Zig now. We're fighting for your home and for everyone else Burke might target next." Willis nodded, looking down at his careful documentation of dates and events. Each entry represented another attempt to push him out, but now they would serve as evidence instead of intimidation. The truth, carefully documented and properly presented, would be their weapon against Burke's manipulation. They worked late into the evening, double-checking every detail, making sure their case was airtight. When they finally finished, Zig resumed his position on the couch, his steady presence a reminder of why this fight mattered so much. The stakes were deeply personal. Willis's home, his independence, his relationship with his daughter, and the loyal dog who'd become so much more than an unwanted visitor. But they were also precise and provable, documented in papers and recordings that would be impossible to dismiss. As they gathered their materials together, Willis felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope backed by purpose and plan. They had the truth on their side, and they would use it to protect not just his home, but the very meaning of community that Burke had tried to corrupt. The night before the board review brought one of the worst storms of the season. Thunder crashed overhead as rain pounded against the windows of Willis's house, drumming an endless rhythm against the glass. The wind howled through the trees, making branches scrape against the siding like skeletal fingers. Inside, Willis sat in his favorite chair, trying to stay calm despite his growing anxiety about tomorrow's hearing. Zig lay alert at his feet, amber eyes fixed on Willis's face with unwavering attention. The old clock on the mantel showed just past 9 when the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the house into darkness. "Well, that's just perfect," Willis muttered, reaching for the flashlight he kept in the side table drawer. Before he could grab it, a loud crack from the back door made him freeze. Zig's head snapped up, ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The sound of splintering wood cut through the storm's chaos. Willis's heart began to race as he heard heavy footsteps in the kitchen. Zig stood, positioning himself between Willis and the doorway just as a beam of light cut through the darkness. Rafe Qualls's bulky silhouette filled the doorframe, flashlight in one hand and something that looked ominously like a crowbar in the other. "Evening, old man," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made Willis's chest tighten. "Thought we might have a little chat before tomorrow's meeting." "You're breaking and entering," Willis said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the pressure building in his chest. "Get out of my house." Rafe took a step forward. "See, that's not how this works. Burke sent me to remove the problem. Could have been simple if you just sold when you were supposed to." The pain in Willis's chest intensified, spreading down his left arm. His breath came in short gasps as he tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The room started to spin, and he slumped sideways in his chair. Zig sprang into action immediately, training taking over. The German shepherd nudged Willis carefully until he slid to the floor in the recovery position, then darted to the back door where Willis's medical alert lanyard hung. With precise movements, Zig grabbed the lanyard and began his emergency bark. Sequence: 3 sharp barks, pause, 3 sharp barks, pause. A distinct pattern cutting through the storm's chaos. Across the street at the diner, Delia was closing up despite the storm when she heard it. She knew that bark pattern. Tamsin had explained it during their planning sessions. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, but her voice was clear when she dialed emergency services. 911, what's your emergency? Emergency. Send an ambulance to 423 Cedar Ridge Drive, Delia said firmly. Willis Brandt's having a heart attack, and there's an intruder in his house. Rafe stood frozen for a moment, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls as sirens began to wail in the distance. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the approaching sound of emergency vehicles sent him running into the rain-soaked night. Zig never left Willis's side, pressing against his shoulder, offering warmth and comfort while monitoring his breathing. The dog's training kept him calm and focused even as red and blue lights began to flash through the windows and voices called out from outside. The EMTs worked efficiently, checking Willis's vitals and hooking him up to portable monitors. "Good boy," one of them said to Zig, noting how the dog had positioned Willis. "You probably saved his life tonight." They loaded Willis onto a stretcher, and Zig stayed right with him, paws moving in perfect rhythm with the EMT's steps. Even as they prepared to load Willis into the ambulance, Zig remained pressed against his shoulder, refusing to leave his post. "The dog needs to come," Willis managed to say weakly. "He's my cardiac alert service animal." The EMTs exchanged glances, then nodded. "He can ride in front with my partner," said the lead paramedic. "He's earned it." As they drove through the storm toward the hospital, Willis reached out with a shaking hand to touch Zig's fur. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. What had started as a battle over a house and a couch had become something far more vital. This wasn't just about property or pride anymore. It was about life itself, about the bonds that kept people going when everything else fell apart. Zig had done exactly what Tamsin had trained him to do, exactly what he'd been placed in Willis's home to do. Not just occupy a couch or challenge an unjust rule, but to keep a man alive when his heart betrayed him. The house was important. Yes, but not nearly as important as the life within it, and the four-legged guardian who'd been sent to protect it. Morning light crept through Willis's windows, revealing damp walls where the storm's fury had seeped in. The air held that peculiar stillness that often follows violent weather, like nature holding its breath. Willis sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, while two police officers carefully took down Delia's statement. "And you're certain it was Rafe Qualls you saw leaving the premises?" the younger officer asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Clear as day," Delia confirmed, her voice steady. "That security light across the street caught him full in the face when he ran. Been serving him coffee at my diner for months. I'd know that shaved head anywhere." The officers nodded, jotting down final notes before heading out. "We'll pick him up," the senior officer assured them. "With the break-in and entering charge, plus the assault implications, he won't be causing any more trouble." As the morning progressed, Willis settled on his couch, still sore from the previous night's ordeal, but clear-headed enough to focus. Tamsin spread the accommodation packet across the coffee table, her movements more gentle than they'd been in years. "Let's go through this timeline again, Dad," she said softly. "We need to be absolutely clear about when the intimidation started." Willis nodded, pointing to the first entry. "It began the day after Zig arrived. Burke showed up with that new no animals clause. Then came the fines daily. The surprise inspection started a week later." Across the room, Delia carefully transferred her recording to a USB drive, making multiple copies. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, the only sign of how deeply last night's events had affected her. "Got it all backed up," she announced. Burke's exact words about erasing those fines if Willis sold. Clear as a bell. They worked methodically through the morning, assembling their case. Tamsin made calls, confirming that both the service dog, program director, and the EMTs from the previous night would testify if needed. The director's statement detailed Zig's specialized training and certification. The EMT report documented Willis's cardiac event, and Zig's textbook response to the emergency. Words were few as they worked, each focused on their tasks. The emotional weight of the previous night's violence was channeled into careful preparation, into sticky notes and highlighted passages, into perfectly arranged stacks of papers. Zig, sensing the importance of the moment, performed his own ritual. He circled the couch 3 times, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor, before settling into his usual spot. His breathing fell into a steady rhythm, like a metronome keeping time with their preparations. Willis sat in his armchair, practicing his statement. "Just the facts," he reminded himself. Burke introduced the new clause without proper notice. Rafe conducted unauthorized inspections. The fines accumulated without proper documentation. He repeated these points until they felt natural on his tongue, stripped of anger or fear. As afternoon light filled the room, Tamsin disappeared upstairs, returning with a cardigan draped over her arm. The soft blue wool was well worn but carefully preserved, and Willis recognized it immediately, his late wife's favorite. "This is the one we used," Tamsin explained quietly, "for Zig's scent training. I thought maybe he'd want to wear it tomorrow." Willis touched the fabric gently, remembering how many times he'd seen his wife wrapped in its warmth. "She'd be proud of you," he said softly. For all of this, Tamsin's eyes grew bright, but she kept her focus on the task at hand, helping Willis try on the cardigan and making sure it still fit properly. The rest of the day passed in quiet industry. They gathered papers into folders, arranged them in presentation order, and double-checked every detail. Zig maintained his calm presence on the couch, occasionally lifting his head to track their movements before settling back into his peaceful vigil. As evening approached, Willis found himself standing by the window, breathing deeply and evenly. The simple act of inhaling and exhaling seemed to counter the chaos of the previous night's storm. Behind him, papers rustled softly as Tamsin organized the last of their documentation. The sound of Dahlia humming in the kitchen drifted in, along with the smell of fresh coffee. These small domestic moments felt like anchors, grounding them all in the calm after the storm. The community center's meeting room buzzed with tension as homeowners filled the plastic chairs. Willis sat in the front row, Zig at his feet, while Tamsin and Dahlia flanked him protectively. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over Burke Halstead's perfectly pressed suit as he took his position at the podium. "Members of the board," Burke began, his voice dripping with practiced authority, "we're here to address a clear violation of our community standards." He shuffled his papers with manicured hands. The No Animals Clause exists to protect property values and ensure the safety of all residents. Willis felt his chest tighten as Burke continued listing infractions and citing bylaws. The President's words painted a picture of willful defiance, of community standards being trampled. But something in Burke's polished delivery felt hollow, like a veneer covering rot. "Furthermore," Burke declared, gesturing dramatically, "Mr. Brandt's continued non-compliance threatens the very fabric of our neighborhood's stability." Delia stood up then, her sturdy frame casting a shadow across Burke's papers. "I request permission to play something for the board," she said, holding up a small recording device. "It's relevant to these proceedings." Burke's confident smile faltered for just a moment. "I object to this irregularity," he protested, but the board chair nodded her approval. The room fell silent as Delia pressed play. Burke's voice filled the space, smooth as oil. "Look, the fines can disappear if you're reasonable about this. Sell now while you can still walk away with something. Otherwise," the recording continued, laying bare the calculated pressure, the veiled threats. Color drained from Burke's face as his own words exposed his scheme. He fumbled with his tie, searching for words to explain away the damning evidence. Dr. Sarah Chun, the service dog program director, took the podium next. Her testimony was clear and professional. "Zig's placement with Mr. Brandt follows all legal requirements for service animals under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The dog's cardiac alert training is specifically tailored to Mr. Brandt's medical needs." The tension in the room peaked as she explained Zig's vital role. Suddenly, the German shepherd rose to his feet, laser-focused on Willis. The dog's posture was alert but calm, his training evident in every movement. An MT, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, portable heart monitor in hand. "If I may," he said, quickly attaching the leads to Willis's chest through his shirt. Numbers flashed on the small screen, showing a clear dip in rhythm, exactly what Zig had detected. Silence fell over the room. Board members exchanged meaningful glances as the pattern became undeniable. The correlation between Zig's alert and Willis's cardiac readings was there in black and white. The board chair cleared her throat. After reviewing all evidence presented, including the illegal addition of the No Animals Clause and federal accommodation laws, this board finds in favor of Mr. Brandt. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "The clause is struck down as improperly added. All fines are hereby vacated. Mr. Brandt may keep his service dog without penalty." Burke's carefully maintained facade cracked completely. His lips pulled back in an ugly snarl as he started to protest, but movement at the back of the room caught everyone's attention. Two individuals in plain clothes stepped forward, badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Halstead," one said firmly, "we'd like to speak with you about allegations of fraud and coercion." Burke's mask of civility shattered entirely as he realized his schemes had finally caught up with him. His perfectly polished world was crumbling, exposed by a recording, a dog's devotion, and the truth he'd tried so hard to bury beneath bylaws and threats. Willis sat quietly, one hand resting on Zig's head, watching as justice unfolded in the same room where Burke had once wielded rules like weapons. The German shepherd leaned against his leg, steady and alert, a living symbol of protection against those who would abuse power for profit. The morning after the hearing, Willis found an official envelope in his mailbox. Unlike the threatening notices he'd grown used to, this one contained the HOA Board's formal apology and complete rescission of the illegal No Animals clause. Below that were copies of the criminal complaints filed against Burke Halstead for fraud and Rafe Qualls for criminal trespass. Willis stood in his driveway, letting the spring sunshine warm his face as he read. The words blurred a little, not from fear this time, but from relief. Beside him, Zig sat alert and steady, his amber eyes scanning the quiet street out of habit. "Dad?" Tamsin's voice called from the front door. "Let's get that couch moved while it's still morning." Inside, they studied the floral couch that had been the center of so much conflict. Without speaking, they each took an end. The familiar pattern of roses and vines shifted in the light as they carefully maneuvered it across the living room to rest beneath the bay window. "Perfect spot," Tamsin said, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Best light in the house." Zig didn't wait for an invitation. He hopped up onto his official post, turning once before settling into position. The sunlight caught his fur, turning it to burnished gold. His alert eyes stayed fixed on Willis, watching over him as he was trained to do. "Looks right," Willis said softly, like it was always meant to be there. Over the next week, father and daughter fell into an easy rhythm. Each morning started with Willis's medication, carefully organized in a weekly pillbox Tamsin had bought. Zig would nose at Willis's hand if he was even a few minutes late taking them. They took short walks around the neighborhood, building up Willis's strength. Sometimes they'd pass other residents who now smiled and waved, no longer afraid of Burke's influence. Zig padded faithfully between them, his training evident in every careful step. Tamsin worked remotely most days, her laptop set up at the kitchen table, the quiet click of keys mixed with the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Sometimes Willis would sit with her, working on the certification paperwork for Zig. They didn't need many words. The comfortable silence felt like healing. "Remember how Mom used to sing while she worked in here?" Tamsin asked one afternoon, looking up from her computer. Willis nodded, his throat tight. "Off-key as a rusty hinge. But happy," Tamsin added, with a small smile. "Yeah, happy." The house began to change around them. Willis found himself opening blinds that had been closed for years. Tamsin brought in a few new plants, setting them on windowsills. Zig's water bowl and brush had their own corner in the kitchen. Little by little, the rooms lost their museum-like stillness. The sound of Tamsin's laugh, the click of Zig's nails on the hardwood, even the squeak of that one floorboard by the stairs, it all added up to something like life again. One evening, Willis took out his ledger, the one where he'd so carefully recorded every fine and threat. The neat columns of numbers stared up at him, a record of Burke's attempted extortion. With steady hands, Willis took out his pen and wrote across the page in clear letters, "Paid in full." He closed the book and tucked it away in his desk drawer. Not to forget, but to move forward. The victory wasn't in grand speeches or dramatic moments. It was in the quiet choice to accept help when it was offered, to let his daughter back in, to make room for a guardian angel with 4 paws and unfailing devotion. That night, Willis sat on the floral couch with Tamsin, watching the sunset paint the walls gold. Zig lay across their feet, his breathing deep and even. The steady thump of his tail matched the rhythm of their hearts. Father, daughter, and faithful shepherd, keeping time together in a home that finally felt alive again. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe and I'll be here again tomorrow with another quiet story full of the kind of love that lasts.